Israel has gone to polls for the fourth time in 2 years. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces a tough re-election battle. While the incumbent Prime Minister remains ahead in the polls, the Likud party is uncertain of clinching a governing majority. The main contenders for the elections are Israel's longest-running Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Blue and White centrist alliance leader Benny Gantz, Likud defector Gideon Saar, who broke with Netanyahu to form his own New Hope party, and Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid. Netanyahu has turned Israel's world-leading rollout of vaccines into a showcase of his campaign and leadership, while the Likud leader was banking on it to be enough to help him sail through in the elections. Just a day before the elections, Netanyahu was even seen rallying supporters as he visited Jerusalem's famous market.
I'm happy to be here with you. I ask you, do you want another election? Do you want a Likud government?
But as the crucial polls inched closer, thousands took to the streets to protest against Netanyahu's policies and his leadership. Anti-corruption trial was also a main focus, and former allies joining rival parties have also dented Netanyahu's hopes. This also means that Bibi's long run could be in danger. While the series of elections have been going on since April 2019, the winning parties have failed to form a stable government in Israel. Experts say that Netanyahu's Likud party is still likely to emerge as the biggest player, but polls predict that Israel's election is heading towards a deadlock. Although Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party is leading in the polls, it will need coalition partners to secure a 61-seat majority in the 120-seat Knesset. That means Israel is looking at three possible outcomes. First, another coalition under Netanyahu. Secondly, an ideologically divided government united only by its opposition to Netanyahu. Or lastly, a looming fifth election for the West Asian nation. However, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank shrugged off the vote. Most of them predict that it would produce yet another right-wing government.
Unfortunately, as Palestinian people, we will not count on the Israeli elections since it revolves in a vicious circle, and for the past 30 years, there has not been any tangible progress on the ground.
Now, diplomatic correspondent Amichai Steen is joining us live from Jerusalem. Amichai, thank you so much for joining us on WION. Now, this is the fourth election in Israel in just the last 2 years. The big question, will Netanyahu retain power or will he be finally voted out? Now, the reports suggest that Likud party may still emerge as the biggest party, but may fall just short of majority by just a couple of seats. What is the latest that you're picking up?
Right. So in Israel, the system is not the biggest party which will be able to form a government, but the question is whoever can get to 61 a majority in Israel parliament, the Knesset. So right now, the latest polls we have, by the way, they are only from the weekend. We cannot publish this week polls that this is a deadlock 60-60 right now. And this means if this stays the situation, we will go to a fifth election campaign. And this is the story right now. We are talking about who will be able to get out the voters outside. Now, the weather in Israel is not the best today. This might influence the election turnout. And so each voice will be really critical for this story because we're talking about four parties that are hanging on the possible going into parliament or going out of parliament. And these four parties will influence how the next coalition will look like, and if Israel will go to a fifth election or a fourth election. Now, or if we have a government now. Now, like you said, Netanyahu has really some kind of a lead because he has really stable group of parties which are agreeing to go with him. The opposition is really vast amount of parties which it will be difficult to form a coalition. Their only goal right now of these opposition party is to get Netanyahu out of office. So Netanyahu has an easier step to form a government, but if the opposition get the 61, Netanyahu is going to get a very hard time in forming a government.
Right, but the big question is, suppose Netanyahu's party does not gain majority in these polls, then can all the rival opposition parties, including leftist parties, centrist parties and right-wing parties who are simply opposed to Netanyahu, can they all combine with only the common theme among all of them is their opposition to Netanyahu? If such all opposition parties combine in Israel, can they really form a stable government?
Exactly, that's the big story. And we have, in recent days, among these, let's say, opposition parties to Netanyahu, quote that some party leaders saying, I won't sit with him, I won't sit underneath him, I won't go into a government that he will form. So there is a vast amount of promises on that side of the political spectrum, and that's why it's going to be, like you said, very problematic to form some kind of a stable government that will oppose Netanyahu. But still, I think from the past experience, after they saw what happened to Gantz and Blue and White, these parties will find some way of common factor, even, for 1 year government or 2 years government, to try and form a government to get Netanyahu out of office, because the main theme, again, like I said, it's not getting Netanyahu out. They won't probably take all these issues like settlements and other economic issues. They will try to somehow stabilize things and maybe form a government for 1 or 2 years. But I think this time they understand that if they get the 61, they will need to find some kind of common factor to form a government. If not, we can go to fifth election, or Netanyahu might find some people who go from this camp to his camp.
Amichai, Netanyahu is Israel's longest-serving prime minister. He is even called King Bibi by his supporters simply due to the power he commands in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. He has also highlighted the vaccination campaign in Israel during his campaign trail, calling Israel a vaccination nation. But he's also facing a lot of opposition. Close to 20,000 people have been regularly taken to the streets of Israel opposing Netanyahu over the corruption allegations that he's facing. Obviously, he's denied those allegations.
Exactly. You talked about the vaccination campaign. Netanyahu expected that he will have not 30 MPs in the polls like it is right now, but 40 MPs he expected to get in the polls, and this would have changed everything. But the vaccination campaign is not getting him as high as he expected to go. And one of the reasons is that there's some kind of, you can call it Netanyahu fatigue, because he has been in power for almost 12 years, and there's some kind of fatigue also in the right spectrum of the Israeli political system regarding Netanyahu. You have, for example, for the first time, right-wing party that are saying we're right parties, we support settlements, we support other issues, but we don't want Netanyahu in power. This has never been in the last election. So with some kind of Netanyahu fatigue, but still Netanyahu is very, very popular. Like you see, he has, let's say, a stable base of 50 plus MPs in parties that support him. So yes, there's some kind of Netanyahu fatigue, and that's the reason he's not getting as a high number as he might expected. But still, he has a very, very stable base, even though his trial, even other issues like we don't have a budget for the last 2 years. But still, Netanyahu is very popular, although it's the first time that you can see right-wing parties that saying we don't want Netanyahu in power.
Amichai, we are almost out of time in this segment, but I want a very short, quick answer from you. What do you expect? Will Netanyahu win these polls, or will he be voted out?
It's very difficult to say. It's very difficult to predict, because, like I said, there are 4 parties that are really on the marginal issue whether they will enter the Knesset, the parliament, or waste their votes out. And these 4 parties will tell us if Netanyahu has a 61 government or the other side has a 61 government. So we will need to wait even till Wednesday evening or even Thursday to really find out these results and see which party got in the Knesset and how does it influence Netanyahu possibility to form a government. Really, we won't know it at least for 24, 48 hours until, unless the exit polls that were published today at 10 o'clock will give us a clear picture who is in and who is out.
Amichai Stein, thank you so much for joining us from Jerusalem with the latest on the Israel polls. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.